I'm going to stay here because I don't want to leave my sisters and colleagues. This is such a treat for me because, first of all, I get to learn about sheriffs. I get to learn about how important it is that politicians have breasts. 2 ways that it's important, right? I get to learn new ways that I didn't know about how much we have to learn from the women of Africa who are ahead of us in many ways of consciousness. And soon we'll all get to learn from each other, because the discussion time, I find, is absolutely great. And it's so important that we are in a room together with all 5 senses. Yes, it's great to have technology and screens and press send and all of that, but we shouldn't confuse pressing send with voting and actually doing something. And also, you know, we are communal animals. We need each other. We have to be together with all 5 senses in order to truly understand each other. All the chemicals in our brains that produce empathy do not work unless we are together in this space. And in a way, the highest purpose of technology is to bring us together in a space like this. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion time when I hope that we will, you know, think of many more outrageous things to do. And, you know, I think we're all on edge, too, because of the debate this evening and what's going to happen. But let's just remember that we can change the effect of the election. We can change the outcome of the election. You know, the president doesn't have to be a good or bad debater. You realize that. We already know the issues. We know we're going to be voting out of self-respect. And so in a deep sense, you and I in this room have just as much power as what is going on in that debate. You know, I think that in a way, politics has become falsely estranged from us. And in my life, I was lucky to have a mother who was very, very attached to politics because of what she had witnessed during the Depression. So each time she heard the name Roosevelt, tears came to her eyes, you know. And that gave me the idea that my life was affected by what went on in politics. But the more I worked in politics, the more I understood that there was an effort to defeat that there were forces who benefited from a low voter turnout, in which case they were older, richer, whiter voters. And there was a profound effort beginning in the Nixon administration to convince people that politics was dirty, you didn't want to get involved. And indeed, it was a very conscious tactic of the Right to Life groups and others to use very hostile, accusatory advertising. Even if it didn't change the vote per se, it made people think that politics was dirty, and they were more likely to withdraw from it. And at the same time, the idea that one vote didn't count. So we now find ourselves in a situation that is very, very odd, because in fact a greater percentage of eligible voters vote in India, with all the problems of poverty and illiteracy that India has. A greater percentage of folks vote in India than here. And it's also true there that poorer people vote more than richer people, because they have an accurate understanding that the voting booth is the one place on earth in which they're equal. So what has happened to us? You know, I think we really, really need to think deeply, very, very deeply about that. And understand not only is the voting booth the one place we're equal, But the democracy is a continual process. It's like brushing your teeth every day. It is not something you do once in a while. It is absolutely an intrinsic part of our lives. And I have to say, as an organizer, it's exciting, it's fun, it's where you meet each other. There's, backyard parties, and, I fell in love with campaigns, I think, during the Eisenhower-Stevenson campaign. Does anybody here even remember? Because I was in high school, and I volunteered. And it was amazing, because it was the one place on earth in which you could walk in the door and everybody was accepted. And I had never experienced that before. And that is still true about political campaigns. It's an exciting place to meet people. It is a place where your unique expertise is frequently welcomed. It is so magnetic and so important in our lives, and yet we have been persuaded to be separate from it. Now, there is also the question of honesty at the polls, which we are all struggling with. So not only do we need to vote, we need to fight to vote. Okay? And that is especially in my mind when I am here in Florida, because, because in the year 2000 and the famous, Bush-Gore race, okay, it happened quite by accident, because it was a campus lecture. It was not associated with the campaign at all. That I was speaking in Palm Beach County Community College at noon the day after the election. There were about 706 people, I think, in the auditorium, this large auditorium. All we knew was that the final results were not in yet, and perhaps there needed to be. We didn't know anything, right? But of course, we were all obsessed with talking about the election. So someone got up and said, she said, I tried to go to my voting place, but it was surrounded by cop cars and I couldn't reach it. And a couple of other people said, oh, that happened to me. And then a man got up and said that he had only been able to see the ballot on the way out, not on the way in. And so he had realized that he had voted for Buchanan instead of for Gore, the famous butterfly ballot, which not all of you are old enough to remember, but probably you've read about it, right? There were several women from a retirement community who said that their bus had taken them to the wrong polling place, and therefore they had never been able to get to the right polling place. All right, by the end of that morning, it turned out that there were about 100 people out of 706 who had never been able to vote at all, or who had voted for a candidate not of their choice. And imagine what that is like, projected. There was a man of about 40 or so, a former military officer, who got up with tears in his eyes and said he had a 10-year-old daughter, and would I stay to help them protest the next day? At the time, I had I had to go someplace the next day, and also I thought maybe it's not good to have an outsider, here protesting. Anyway, I didn't do it. That was before all the Republican assistance from political officers in Washington came here. Right? I didn't do it. I regret it to this day. I so regret it. Not that I think that I could or would have made a difference, but that I so deeply believe that the only way we can act effectively and ethically is to behave as if everything we do matters. Because we have no way of knowing, which thing we do is going to matter. I have, written congressional testimony and slaved over it and had no impact whatsoever. And then someone has come up to me and said, I never thought I would be hearing if men could menstruate, would be, on a camp. No. So we don't know which thing of what we do is really vital and important. So I think because of the timeliness of our being here together, I especially want to emphasize how important it is that democratic decision-making bodies look like the country for which they are making decisions. How important it is that each one of us participate in this, and how much fun it is. It's how we meet each other. It's a way of finding community. It is, I mean, politics in all of its forms is the single most exciting thing in my life. I mean, including being an organizer for the women's movement, because the personal is political, as we all know. So all of that is so exciting and so interesting and so full of learning, and I just hope that we can communicate that despite the barriers that have been set up to keep us from participating. Now, there's one more thing before I get into the power of the vote, which I have a little, sequence here I want to read to you. I also want to tell you, in case you haven't encountered, a book called Sex and World Peace by Valerie Hudson and 4 other academics who have done a very, very important job of proving what we know in our hearts. Actually, I think that we've all been saying it for at least 40 years about smaller societies, about tribal societies, explaining that the polarized sex roles, extremely polarized between feminine and masculine, are the single greatest, most predictive characteristic of violence in a society, organized violence. But what this book does is to demonstrate with hundreds of current nations by all kinds of, I promise you, completely detailed, respectable studies, that the greatest predictor by far of whether or not a country is violent within itself and also towards its neighboring countries or towards other countries in the world is not poverty, is not the absence of natural resources, is not religion, and is not degree of democracy. It's violence against females. That is what predicts violence in the rest of society, because it normalizes violence. And that means all the way from infanticide, female infanticide, which has always, not always, but in recent years at least, been with us because of son preference. So it has taken the form of just not feeding females or giving health services or whatever it is. And now, because technologically it's possible to abort female fetuses, it has also, overlaid on prejudice, then technology becomes a problem in and of itself. And so now females are no longer the majority of people in this world. There are several million missing females every year, and it is so profoundly out of balance with a son surplus and a daughter deficit that it has become a security problem around the world. So, for instance, the difficulties on the border between North Korea and China. It's also increased sex trafficking as a problem, because females are sold or inveigled to go from poor countries to rich countries. I mean, it's so clearly not about free choice, because it's always from poor countries to rich countries, or in this country, from poor neighborhoods, from Indian country, from poor urban neighborhoods. Sex trafficking is internal as well as across borders. It is so much the cause of everything, and yet we are still in a culture which separates women's issues, racial issues, sexuality issues, as if somehow they were less important than general issues. They are general issues. They are general issues.